On February 27, 2026, something unprecedented happened. An American AI company was designated a supply chain risk to national security. Not a Chinese company, not a Russian company, an American company, based in San Francisco. The company was Anthropic, the maker of Claude, the AI you might be using right now to write code, analyze documents, or just get through your workday. Within 24 hours, Claude shot to #1 on the App Store. ChatGPT saw uninstalls surge 295%, and the Pentagon was still using Claude to select targets in strikes against Iran, even as the president ordered every federal agency to stop using it. This is not a story about a contract dispute. This is a story about who controls AI, what it gets used for, and whether companies have the right or the responsibility to say no when governments demand unfettered access to their technology. I'm Alex. This is the Read AI, and today we're breaking down the most important AI policy fight of 2026. Joining me to unpack this is Steve. Steve is an AI ethics researcher who previously advised the Department of Defense on technology policy. Steve, welcome to the Read AI.
Thanks for having me, Alex. This has been an intense couple of weeks.
That's an understatement. So let me start with the basic timeline, because this moved really fast. When did this actually start?
Publicly, it exploded the last week of February, but the tension had been building since at least January when Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued a memo directing that all DoD AI contracts must allow the military to use the technology for any lawful purpose.
Any lawful purpose. That sounds reasonable on the surface.
That's intentional. It's designed to sound reasonable. But what it actually means is no restrictions, no guardrails, no company-imposed limits on how the military uses your AI as long as it's technically legal under U.S. law.
And Anthropic said no.
Anthropic said no. They're the only major AI company that did.
Let's start there. So, Anthropic had a $200 million contract with the Pentagon. Claude was the first major AI model deployed on the military's classified networks. This was a big deal for them. What exactly did they refuse to do?
Anthropic has two red lines, two things they will not allow Claude to be used for, even by the U.S. military. First, fully autonomous weapons. Second, mass surveillance of American citizens. Explain what fully autonomous weapons means. It means weapon systems that can select and engage targets without meaningful human control. The key word is meaningful. It's not just about having a human in the loop. It's about that human having enough time, information, and authority to actually make the decision.
So, not just a person pressing a button after the AI does everything.
Right. Anthropic's concern is AI systems that identify targets, assess threat levels, and potentially authorize lethal force with minimal human oversight. That's the line they won't cross.
And the second red line, mass surveillance of American citizens?
This is about bulk data collection and analysis of U.S. persons, not targeted surveillance of specific individuals with warrants. That's legal, and Anthropic doesn't prohibit it. This is about dragnet surveillance, collecting massive amounts of data on Americans who aren't under investigation and using AI to analyze it for patterns, associations, predictions.
The kind of thing Edward Snowden revealed the NSA was doing.
Exactly that kind of thing. And Anthropic is saying we won't provide the AI tools that make that easier or more effective.
Now, here's what I don't understand. The Pentagon says they have no interest in doing either of those things, so why wouldn't they just agree to write those restrictions into the contract?
That's the crux of the entire dispute, and the Pentagon's answer is basically, we need flexibility. We need to be able to use the technology for anything that's lawful, and we shouldn't have a private company dictating what we can and cannot do with tools we're paying for.
But Anthropic's position is?
Anthropic's position is that these aren't hypothetical concerns. These are real risks, and as the company that built the technology, they have both the right and the responsibility to impose limits on how it's used, even when the customer is the U.S. government.
So this is fundamentally a fight about who decides.
That's exactly what it is. Who gets to decide how powerful AI systems are used? The government that deploys them or the companies that create them?
So when did this go from a contractual disagreement to a full-blown crisis?
There were escalating tensions through January and February, but the breaking point appears to have been the Venezuela operation, the raid to capture Nicolas Maduro. What happened? According to a senior Pentagon official speaking to Axios, Claude was used in that operation through Anthropic's partnership with Palantir. After the raid, an Anthropic executive allegedly reached out to a Palantir executive to ask whether Claude had been used.
Just to ask if it had been used?
The Pentagon official characterized it as being raised in such a way to imply that they might disapprove of their software being used, because obviously there was kinetic fire during that raid. People were shot. And how did Anthropic respond to that characterization? They flatly denied it. Their spokesperson said they had not discussed the use of Claude for specific operations with the Department of Defense. Note the specific language there, specific operations.
So either someone at Anthropic asked about the Venezuela raid specifically, or they didn't. Those are two very different things.
And we don't have enough information to know which version is true. But what we do know is that this incident, or the Pentagon's perception of this incident, seems to have been a tipping point.
Because it suggested Anthropic might object to military operations after the fact.
Exactly. From the Pentagon's perspective, that's untenable. They can't have a vendor that might pull support or object publicly to operations that are already underway. It creates operational risk. But from Anthropic's perspective, they have a right to understand how their technology is being used, especially if it's potentially being used in ways that violate the spirit of their acceptable use policy. Which brings us to February 27th. February 27th, the deadline.
Walk me through what happened that week.
So on February 26th, the Pentagon provides revised contract language to Anthropic. Anthropic evaluates it and concludes it's insufficient. It doesn't actually protect against autonomous weapons or mass surveillance in any meaningful way.
How do we know that?
Because on the morning of February 27th, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, Anthropic's biggest competitor, publicly states that he shares Anthropic's concerns about these red lines.
Sam Altman agreed with Anthropic.
In the morning, yes. He said OpenAI had similar reservations about unrestricted military use of their models.
In the morning?
In the morning, because that afternoon, everything changed.
The deadline was 5:01 p.m. Eastern.
The Pentagon's deadline for Anthropic to accept the revised terms. Anthropic doesn't sign, and within hours, 3 things happen almost simultaneously.
Walk me through them.
First, President Trump posts on Truth Social directing every federal agency to immediately cease using Anthropic's products. Capital letters, immediate effect. Second, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announces he's designating Anthropic a supply chain risk to national security. Third, and this is the part that really shocked people, OpenAI announces it has reached a deal with the Pentagon to deploy ChatGPT on classified systems.
Wait, Sam Altman said he shared Anthropic's concerns that morning. That same afternoon, he signed a deal without those protections.
Within hours, literally within hours of the deadline passing.
How did people react to that?
Instantly and viscerally. The timing looked coordinated, it looked opportunistic, and Sam Altman's own employees were furious. What happened? ChatGPT uninstalls surged 295% in the US according to App Analytics. Claude downloads spiked. People started campaigns, quit GPT, canceled GPT. A Reddit thread urging people to delete ChatGPT got 33,000 upvotes and kept climbing.
And Claude's numbers?
Claude hit #1 on the US App Store within 24 hours. Anthropic reported a 60% increase in free active users. Daily signups quadrupled. Paid subscriptions more than doubled.
So the Pentagon's attempt to punish Anthropic by cutting them off actually made them more popular.
Dramatically more popular. It became a rallying moment. People saw Anthropic as the company that stood up to the government on principle, even when it cost them $200 million.
And what did Sam Altman do?
2 days later, he posted an internal memo saying OpenAI's deal was opportunistic and sloppy, and that they were renegotiating to add language about not using the technology for domestic surveillance of U.S. persons.
So he admitted it was a mistake?
He admitted the execution was rushed. Whether the deal itself was a mistake, that's still being debated.
All right, if you're listening to this, you probably use AI every day. Maybe Claude, maybe ChatGPT, maybe both. And what's happening right now isn't just a Pentagon contract dispute. It's a fight about whether AI companies can or should say no when governments ask for unfettered access to their technology. Most AI coverage will give you the headline. We're giving you the full story, the contracts, the timeline, the statutes, the precedents, the international implications, because understanding AI governance deeply isn't optional anymore. It's essential. I want to hear from you. Do you think Anthropic is right to draw these red lines? Or do you think the U.S. military should be able to use any technology for national security purposes? No restrictions. Drop a comment. This is not a hypothetical debate. This is happening right now, and the decisions being made this month will shape AI governance for the next decade. If you're finding this deep dive valuable, subscribe to the Read AI. We're here to give you the comprehensive analysis that nobody else is providing. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening in AI policy. All right, Steve, let's talk about what happened after the blacklist. So, the Pentagon designates Anthropic a supply chain risk. What does that actually mean?
This is an extremely serious designation. It's authority that comes from two federal statutes, the Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Security Act and Section 3252 of Title 10. These laws give the Defense Department power to exclude companies from the defense supply chain if they pose a risk to national security.
And historically, who gets designated this way?
Foreign adversaries, Chinese companies with ties to the People's Liberation Army, Russian entities, companies that are suspected of being fronts for hostile intelligence services.
Not American companies.
Anthropic is the first American company ever to be publicly designated a supply chain risk under these statutes. What does the designation actually do? It requires every defense contractor and vendor doing business with the Pentagon to certify that they don't use Anthropic's technology in any work related to DoD contracts. If you're Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Palantir, any company with Pentagon contracts, you have to prove you're not touching Claude.
So it's not just the $200 million Pentagon contract, it's potentially all of Anthropic's enterprise revenue from defense contractors.
Potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Anthropic gets about 80% of its revenue from enterprise customers. Many of those customers either have Pentagon contracts or want them in the future.
So the Pentagon is trying to starve Anthropic economically.
The Pentagon would say they're protecting national security by ensuring defense contractors don't rely on unreliable vendors. But yes, the practical effect is economic pressure.
How did the industry react?
A tech industry group, whose members include NVIDIA, Google, and Anthropic, sent a letter to Hegseth expressing concern about designating an American company as a supply chain risk, and multiple legal scholars immediately said the designation probably won't survive court challenge.
Why not?
Several reasons. First, the statutory authority for supply chain risk designations is designed for foreign threats, not domestic contractual disputes. Second, the Pentagon is required to make a finding that exclusion is necessary to protect national security, but Claude has been used extensively in classified operations with these restrictions in place, and according to Anthropic, the restrictions have not affected a single government mission to date.
So if it's been working fine with the restrictions, how is it necessary to remove them?
That's the legal problem. The Pentagon would need to explain what changed or what new threat emerged. A contractual disagreement about future use doesn't obviously meet the statutory standard.
Has Anthropic said they'll challenge it?
Yes, they've publicly stated they will challenge any supply chain risk designation in court, and legal experts think they have a strong case.
Okay, so here's where this truly gets bizarre. While all this is happening, while Trump is ordering agencies to stop using Claude, while the Pentagon is designating Anthropic a supply chain risk, the U.S. military is actively using Claude in operations. Tell me about the Iran strikes.
On March 2nd, just days after the blacklist, the Wall Street Journal reported that Claude was used by U.S. forces to help select targets in strikes against Iran-backed forces.
So the president orders agencies to stop using Anthropic's technology, and the military is using it anyway?
Yes. In active combat operations, yes.
How is that possible?
The ban includes a 6-month transition period. The Pentagon can't just flip a switch and stop using Claude overnight. It's too deeply integrated into classified systems. So while the political theater is playing out, operational reality continues.
That's almost darkly comic. The administration is publicly condemning Anthropic as a national security risk while simultaneously relying on their technology in warfare.
It reveals the disconnect between politics and operational necessity. The Pentagon genuinely needs Claude. Multiple DoD officials have said on background that replacing it will be extremely difficult because the other model companies are just behind when it comes to specialized government applications.
So Claude is actually better for military purposes than ChatGPT or Gemini.
For certain applications, yes. Anthropic was first to classified networks, first to national laboratories, first to offer custom models built specifically for national security use cases. They've been optimizing for government work for over a year, while OpenAI and Google focused on consumer markets.
Which makes the timing of this fight even stranger. If the Pentagon needs Claude, why pick this fight now?
I think there are a few possible explanations. One is ideological. This administration has a very strong government should have full authority position. Two is precedent. They don't want any AI company thinking they can impose restrictions on government use. Three is competitive. OpenAI and xAI both benefit if Anthropic is weakened. You're saying there might be industrial policy embedded in this?
I'm saying that when Sam Altman signs a deal hours after Anthropic is blacklisted, when Elon Musk's xAI also gets certified for classified use around the same time, and when both companies have personal connections to the administration, the optics raise questions. Kind of questions.
Whether this is purely about national security policy, or whether there's an element of rewarding companies that comply and punishing ones that don't.
Let's talk about OpenAI specifically, because the backlash against them seems to have been severe and immediate.
It was brutal, and I think it caught Sam Altman completely off guard.
Why was the reaction so strong?
3 reasons. First, the timing. Announcing the Pentagon deal within hours of Anthropic being blacklisted looked coordinated, even if it wasn't. Second, the hypocrisy. Altman said that morning he shared Anthropic's concerns. Then he signed away those protections that afternoon. Third, the perception that OpenAI is no longer the scrappy safety-first AI lab. It's a company that will compromise on principles to get lucrative government contracts.
And what did the backlash actually look like?
App uninstalls surged 295%. That's massive. The Quit GPT campaign spread across social media. Major tech influencers deleted their GPT accounts publicly. OpenAI's own employees were reportedly furious. Some threatened to quit.
And this forced Altman to respond?
2 days later, he posted that internal memo saying the deal was opportunistic and sloppy and that they shouldn't have rushed. He announced they were adding language to prevent domestic surveillance of U.S. persons and nationals.
So he essentially admitted the deal was a mistake.
He admitted the execution was flawed, but note what he added back in. Only domestic surveillance restrictions, not autonomous weapons. OpenAI is still allowing the Pentagon to use ChatGPT for autonomous weapon systems.
And nobody seemed to notice that distinction?
Most people didn't. The narrative became Sam listened and fixed it. But if you look at what actually changed, it's a much narrower protection than what Anthropic refused to remove.
So Anthropic's red lines were both autonomous weapons and mass surveillance. OpenAI added back only the surveillance piece.
Correct. And even that surveillance restriction is specifically about domestic surveillance of U.S. persons and nationals. It doesn't prevent mass surveillance of non-U.S. persons, which is arguably where most of the potential harm could occur globally.
So it's a PR fix more than a policy fix.
It's enough to quiet the immediate backlash without actually matching Anthropic's position.
Let's talk about the other AI companies, because there are clear divides here.
So we've talked about Anthropic saying no and OpenAI saying yes. What about the other AI companies?
Google and xAI have both agreed to deploy their models on Pentagon classified networks. Both accepted the Any Lawful Purpose standard. Google has Gemini. xAI has Grok. How do they compare to Claude technically?
For classified government applications, Claude was considered best in class. A Pentagon official told Axios that replacing it would be difficult because the other model companies are just behind.
Even Google?
For these specific use cases, yes. Google's Gemini is excellent for many things, but Anthropic optimized Claude specifically for government work, custom models, specialized fine-tuning, integration with classified networks, tight security controls.
And Grok?
Grok is newer and less proven. One official said it's on board with being used in a classified setting, but it's not viewed as being as advanced as Claude.
So the Pentagon might be forcing itself to use inferior tools.
In the short term, potentially, yes. In the long term, Google and OpenAI will catch up. The question is whether that 6-month transition period is long enough, and whether the Pentagon is willing to accept degraded capability during that window.
What about the smaller AI companies, Cohere, others?
Most don't have Pentagon contracts and aren't trying to get them. This is really about the frontier model companies, the ones building the most advanced AI systems.
So we're essentially looking at a world where 3 companies, OpenAI, Google, and xAI, power U.S. military AI, and the one company that tried to impose ethical restrictions gets blacklisted.
That's the current trajectory, yes.
I want to make sure we're being fair to all sides here. What is Anthropic's actual position? Because some people are framing this as anti-military or anti-government.
Anthropic has been very clear that they support working with the U.S. government and military. They were the first frontier AI company on classified networks. They've been extensively deployed for intelligence analysis, operational planning, cyber operations. They've refused hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue from Chinese companies to maintain U.S. technological advantage.
So this isn't about refusing to work with the military.
No, it's about 2 specific use cases: fully autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance. Everything else is on the table.
And have those restrictions actually impacted military operations?
According to Anthropic, no. They claim these restrictions have not affected a single government mission to date.
How is that possible? If they haven't impacted anything, why does the Pentagon care?
Because it's about future flexibility and precedent. The Pentagon's position is, we don't want to be constrained by a private company's ethical framework. Even if we're not doing X or Y today, we need to preserve the right to do them tomorrow if they become necessary.
So it's a principle issue on both sides?
Exactly. Anthropic says we have the right and responsibility to restrict how our technology is used. The Pentagon says you don't get to impose conditions on how the U.S. military defends the nation.
And there's no middle ground?
There might be. Anthropic has said they're willing to negotiate. The Pentagon revised the contract language in late February. Anthropic evaluated it and said it was insufficient, but that suggests they were looking for language they could accept.
What would that language look like?
Probably something that defines autonomous weapons and mass surveillance more precisely, with enough specificity that both sides can live with. Maybe carve-outs for emergency situations. Maybe independent review for edge cases.
Is that being negotiated now?
As of this week, reports say Dario Amodi is back at the negotiating table with Pentagon leadership, so yes, it's still active.
I want us to understand what's actually at stake here. When we talk about autonomous weapons, what are we talking about specifically?
So there's a spectrum. On one end, you have weapons that are completely human-controlled. A soldier pulls a trigger. On the other end, you have fully autonomous systems. Identify target, assess threat, engage target, all without a human in the loop making the final call.
Where are we on that spectrum now?
We're somewhere in the middle and moving towards more autonomy. The U.S. military already uses semi-autonomous systems, drones that can track targets, defensive systems that can automatically engage incoming missiles, AI that assists with target selection.
What would fully autonomous look like?
A system that could patrol an area, identify potential threats based on behavior patterns or other criteria, make an engagement decision, and execute that decision, all without a human making the final call.
Does that exist now?
Not in widespread deployment by the U.S. as far as we know, but the technology is getting there, and Claude is advanced enough that it could theoretically be part of such a system.
So Anthropic's concern is we don't want our AI to be the decision-making brain of a system that kills people without human oversight.
Exactly, and the Pentagon's response is we don't plan to do that, but we need to preserve the option in case we need it.
Do they need it?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. The Pentagon would argue that in a future conflict with a near-peer adversary, China for example, autonomous systems might be necessary to match the speed and scale of enemy systems. If China deploys fully autonomous weapons and we don't, we could be at a severe disadvantage.
So it's an arms race question.
Partly, but it's also a question of what kind of world we want to live in. Once you cross certain technological thresholds, it's very hard to go back.
Let's talk about the other red line, mass surveillance. This feels less futuristic and more immediate.
It is immediate, because we know the U.S. government has conducted mass surveillance on Americans before, and AI makes it dramatically more powerful. What do you mean by more powerful? Take the NSA programs Edward Snowden revealed, collecting phone metadata, monitoring internet traffic. That was already concerning, but those programs generated so much data that humans couldn't possibly analyze it all. You needed keyword searches, targeted queries.
And AI changes that.
AI can analyze everything. It can find patterns humans would never notice. It can build predictive models of behavior. It can identify associates, track movements, infer intentions. Mass surveillance plus advanced AI equals a level of population monitoring that would have been impossible even 10 years ago.
And Anthropic is saying they won't enable that?
Not for domestic mass surveillance of Americans, correct. They distinguish between targeted surveillance with proper legal authority, warrants, court orders, oversight, and bulk collection and analysis.
Is the Pentagon asking for bulk collection capabilities?
They say no. They say they just want the flexibility to use AI for lawful intelligence and security purposes, which includes surveillance with appropriate legal authority.
So why won't they just write that into the contract?
Because once you start defining things specifically, you create limitations. The Pentagon wants maximum flexibility. Anthropic wants maximum clarity about what's prohibited.
And there's a trust gap.
A massive trust gap. Anthropic doesn't trust that lawful purposes is sufficient protection. The Pentagon doesn't trust that Anthropic's restrictions won't interfere with legitimate operations.
So, as of right now, where do things stand?
As of this week, Dario Amodei is reportedly back in negotiations with Pentagon leadership. The supply chain risk designation is official but hasn't been legally challenged yet. Federal agencies have 6 months to transition off Claude, and the Pentagon is still using Claude in active operations. What are the possible outcomes? I see 4 paths. 1, they reach a deal. Anthropic gets language they can live with, the Pentagon gets the flexibility they need, everybody moves forward. 2, the designation stands and Anthropic loses the Pentagon plus a chunk of enterprise revenue but becomes the ethical AI company and gains consumer market share. 3, Anthropic challenges the designation in court and wins, forcing the Pentagon to back down. 4, this becomes a political football and gets escalated to levels where neither side can back down without losing face.
Which do you think is most likely?
I think a deal is still possible. Both sides have reasons to compromise. The Pentagon genuinely needs Claude and doesn't want to lose capability. Anthropic doesn't want to be blacklisted and lose enterprise revenue.
What would that deal look like?
Probably more precise definitions of what's prohibited. Maybe independent review mechanisms for edge cases. Maybe sunset clauses that allow renegotiation as technology evolves.
Does the political environment allow for that kind of nuance?
That's the question. This administration has shown a tendency towards absolute positions. You're with us or against us. That makes compromise harder. What about the legal challenge? If Anthropic sues, they have a strong case, according to multiple legal scholars. The statute isn't designed for this kind of situation. But litigation takes time, and the damage could be done before it's resolved. What happens to Claude users during all this? If you have a personal or business subscription, nothing changes. This only affects government contracts. Claude is still available, still being improved, still serving millions of users.
Does this affect Anthropic's business viability?
Short term, they're actually doing better because of the publicity. Long term, if they lose major enterprise customers because of the designation, that's a problem. But they're valued at $60 billion, with strong backing from Google and others. They're not going to collapse tomorrow.
And Steve, I want to end with this. You used to advise the Department of Defense on technology policy. If you were in that role now, what would you recommend?
I would say figure out what you actually need versus what you think you might need someday. If these restrictions haven't impacted a single mission to date, maybe they're not actually constraining anything important. Maybe this is about principle more than practice. I would also say alienating the most safety-conscious AI company sends a terrible signal. If you want AI companies to work with the government responsibly, you have to show that responsible behavior is rewarded, not punished.
And what would you say to Anthropic?
I'd say you're fighting the right fight, but be realistic about the leverage you have. The government can outlast you economically if they choose to. Find a way to preserve your principles while giving the Pentagon enough to claim victory.
Do you think that's possible?
I hope so, because the alternative, a world where no AI company can impose any ethical restrictions on government use, that's not a world I want to live in.
Neither do I. And for everyone listening, this story is still developing. Negotiations are ongoing. Legal challenges may be coming, and the precedent being set here will echo for years. This is why the Read AI exists. Most coverage gives you the headline. We give you the contracts, the statutes, the international implications, the technical realities. We don't just tell you what happened. We tell you why it matters and what comes next. Subscribe to the Read AI because we're going to stay on top of this story as it evolves. This is the most important AI policy fight of 2026, and understanding it deeply isn't optional. It's essential for anyone who works with AI, builds with AI, or lives in a world shaped by AI. Share this episode with someone who needs to understand what's really happening with Anthropic and the Pentagon. This isn't just a contract dispute. This is about who decides how AI shapes warfare, surveillance, and the future of governance. Steve, thank you for breaking this down with such clarity and nuance.
Thanks for having me, Alex. This is important stuff.
I'm Alex, this is the Read AI, and we'll catch you on the next one.